Welcome back, everyone, to the continuing story of a video series about the 100 most anticipated games coming out in 2022. This is part 7. If you'd like to see the earlier videos in the series, you can go down below. They're listed in the description section along with links. We're going to be starting today at ME, and I'll be going through SH. And then the final 20 games will appear in the 8th video, which I plan on getting out in the early part of next week, so it will definitely be up before the end of March, and this series will be concluded. Here's a preview of some of the games I'm going to be covering in the video with their box covers and a little intro music, and then I'll start in talking about Meeples and Monsters. So Meeples and Monsters was on Kickstarter in March of 2021. This is a game that I personally backed, and in fact it's already delivered. It delivered in March of this year. I just recently got my copy in. Now, Meeples and Monsters is designed by Ole Steinnes, who did Champions of Midgard, and it's a worker placement and bag building game. Players are going to be training the village and protecting them from threats and monsters, so it has a little bit of a tower defense feeling to it. But even more than that, it seems to take many pages in its gameplay book from Lords of Waterdeep, a little bit from Orleans, and maybe a little bit from Belfort. But think of it as Lords of Waterdeep, where you're going to be fulfilling contracts, except you're going to be doing this bag building mechanic where you're going to be pulling meeples from bags. And so the colors of meeples that you pull will determine the kinds of actions that you can do. Meeples and Monsters is published by AEG, which has produced Calico, Cascadia, Istanbul, Space Base, and War Chest. And I think that means that maybe other than one or two smaller Kickstarter exclusives, kind of more cosmetic type things, I'm very confident that this game will be at retail in a state at least very close to the Kickstarter. So if this is something that's kind of falling into your wheelhouse, more Lords of Waterdeep, but with a bag building mechanic. Other games that have bag building mechanics that people may be familiar with are things like Quacks of Quedlinburg, and then Orleans on a heavier side. Orleans got heavier complexity, Quacks is lighter and kind of more push your luck. But this is going to be sort of Lords of Waterdeep with bag building. So you should be able to find it at retail. It shouldn't be that much different from the Kickstarter. And I haven't played it yet. Once I do, you'll definitely hear my thoughts on it. But I think it's probably a fairly solid game that sits in the kind of medium light to medium complexity range. And for me, it just felt like a fun take on an old tried and true formula. And it's from a company that I like a lot of their stuff. And I'm a huge fan of Champions of Midgard. So this is one that I wanted to try out. From there, we go to Merchants of the Dark Road, which was on Kickstarter in June of 2020. Now, this is a game that I personally backed. It has already delivered this year. This one actually delivered in January. So this game is a dice placement and pick up and deliver game. It's also got a rondel in it. It's designed by Brian Sewer, who previously designed Coldwater Crown, Freshwater Fly, and Winterborn. And I just keep hearing such good things about his designs. I recently picked up Freshwater Fly, so now I have 2 games of his that I have to get to the table. And I'm also really curious about Winterborn. That was a game that I passed up on Kickstarter. It's now in retail, I think, or it's just about to get there. You know, the global shipping has kind of had its effect on everything. But it's a game that I'm very interested in, and I'd like to play it at some point. Art on Merchants of the Dark Road is by Andrew Bosley, who is a great artist. I think people may recognize his work the most from Everdell and Tapestry, but he's also worked on Citadels, Kalis 1303, the new version of Kalis, Guildmaster, Jurassic Parts, Tungaroo, and Vivid Memories. But in general, I love Andrew Bosley's art. It's so perfect in Everdell, and it's a delight. His art is delightful. So the theme of this game is a little bit darker, so it'll be interesting to see how his art will remain delightful, because I'm sure it will, even in this kind of darker world with a darker theme to it. Merchants of the Dark Road is published by Elf Creek Games, which people probably know best for Atlantis Rising and Honeybuzz. So if those are two games that appeal to you, you may want to pick this one up. I know that both of those games, especially Honeybuzz, I think had a lot of Kickstarter extras, but I believe you can get most of that stuff at retail. And I think people are still enjoying the retail version of the game regardless, even without all of the bling. So Merchants of the Dark Road, if you didn't get the Kickstarter, it's going to be a really good game. I'm fairly certain I'll have more on it once I play it as well. But I think it should be available at retail with most of the stuff in it at least. Messina 1347 is the new Vladimir Suchy game, and it's a retail game. It was supposed to come out in October of 2021, but it's been pushed back by the publisher. You may see some videos and content about it. A lot of that is from people in the West ordering it from Philibert, which I think is a French website. I'm not sure. But people have been ordering copies from Europe and getting them sent here. It hasn't actually published in North America yet, and there's no date on that. But it should be coming this year. Considering it was supposed to publish originally in October 2021, they're still waiting on a few things, I think, from their production partners, but I can't see the North American release getting delayed into 2023. That just seems like too far of a push, even with everything that's been happening with global shipping. So I think we'll see this one soon, I just don't know when. Now, Vladimir Suchy, if you're not familiar with his games, he designed Pulsar 2847, Underwater Cities, and most recently Praga Caput Regni, which was liked by a lot of people in the last couple of years. And it's being published by Delicious Games, who have done a lot of Vladimir's games recently. They did Underwater Cities as well as Praga Caput Regni. Now, the game mainly focuses on variable player powers and worker placement mechanics, and I think the name, Messina 1347, it may sound a little bit dry. Even players who like Vladimir Suchy games may wonder, is this game going to be for me or not? But when you look at the theme, it looks really compelling to me. It takes place during the Black Death in Europe, and it features merchants trying to get out of town. So, I mean, that just sounds super compelling to me. You're fleeing this plague. And I don't know, thematically, it just seems interesting to take your kind of typical, medieval worker placement game and then inject this level of darkness and fear into it. I mean, I think it'll be fun. I like Village. If you know Village, it's a worker placement game where it goes through generations and you keep having to bury your dead as they spawn future generations. So there's like a macabre element to that theme. And this doesn't have that. It doesn't have kind of ascending generations. But the theme could be fun if it's handled in the right way, even though it's dark. I mean, it could be fun because it's dark, if it's handled in the right way. But I like Suchy a lot, so I'm looking forward to it and kind of finding out how the theme is implemented and how the game plays. Mosaic, A Story of Civilization, was on Kickstarter in June of 2021. This is a game that I personally backed, and right now it's slated to deliver in June of this year. Now, it's an action selection and civilization game, and that immediately perks up my ears because I like games like that. I like games that, kind of are far-spanning and have a lot of different mechanics where you can build up a civilization. But a lot of those games can be dry, and they can be difficult to learn with a lot of interconnected parts. So sometimes those games require a lot of time and focus to get good at it and to enjoy it. And that can be difficult then to play it with other players. It all depends on the game. But this one's designed by Glenn Drover, who did Age of Empires, and more recently he's done Lizard Wizard and Raccoon Tycoon. He also worked on, I believe, Railways of the World, which I really like. I love pick up and deliver and train games. So I do like Glenn Drover a lot as a designer, and I have a lot of faith in him. And this game has a lot going on with kind of miniatures on the board. It's also got double-slotted player boards, which I really like. But I have faith in the design with this designer. As I said, there's a lot of building miniatures, which is going to make the board look really cool over the course of the game as all these buildings kind of get placed out on it. There are also military miniatures for each faction, and the models are different for every faction. So I think that's pretty cool. Like, in addition to having maybe different colored miniatures if you're not painting them, you're just pulling them out of the box, they will actually look different. Each one is a different sculpt. So that's pretty cool. And finally, I did pledge it with a big neoprene mat, which I think if you've got, all these kind of building miniatures and character miniatures, and it's a big civilization game, this feels like, to me, that this may be a civilization game done right in terms of just kind of the different elements that interest me. I think it's not going to be that dry. There's going to be a lot of table presence. There's a lot of cool tactile miniatures and stuff. It's got this big neoprene mat. And again, Glenn Drover, the designer, I trust with this. So I think as far as these types of games go, it's going to be the top of the list, at least for me, I think, in terms of table presence, ease of play, and the tactile nature of it, and just the fun element when playing it. That brings me to my father's work, which ran on Kickstarter in May of 2021. And this is one that I personally backed. It's currently slated to deliver in April of this year. It's designed by T.C. Petty III, who's done a few things, I think more as a developer, but he's getting much more into designing games. I think this game is going to really put him on the map and generate a lot of excitement for everything he does after that. So I'm really excited by this game. The art on this is by Damian Mamelidi, who's worked on Brass Birmingham, Edge of Darkness, Radlands, Role Player Adventures, and Tyrants of the Underdark. He tends to work on games that have a darker theme visually, and he has great art that really pops. I think he's going to be perfect for this project. Thematically, this is a horror-themed worker placement game where players are going to be playing different generations in a mad scientist family. And so when the generations pass from one to the next, which may happen from things like one generation of scientists spiraling into insanity from the ethically dubious nature of their experiments, or local townsfolk being roused to attack in angry mobs from the kinds of experiments and things that are happening. So you're going to be looking to pass on your father's journal, your devious experiments, their large estate to future generations. And if that's not handled properly, then those experiments and those resources are going to be lost to time. So it reminds me quite a bit of Village, which I already mentioned, where you play successive generations and you kill the previous generations and put them in the graveyard. You're not quite doing the same thing here in this game, but you are playing successive generations in this mad scientist family. And you are trying to hand off your work so that the next generation can benefit from it and continue it. And I think it's an amazing theme, in my opinion. I suppose it would make a pretty interesting double play on a game day with maybe Abomination. But I like the nature of the game. I like the dark theme. I like, in some ways, its kind of cheeky, tongue-in-cheek sense of humor about its theme. And I like the way that you need to pass things on to successive generations. It just sounds like an interesting theme and an interesting crunch with some fun mechanics. Mythic Battles Ragnarok was on Kickstarter in April of 2021. This is not a game that I personally backed, so I did not back this one. Now it's set to deliver this June, and interestingly enough, it's doing the same kind of, transition that Lords of Hellas did. So Lords of Hellas has a new version coming out this year, Lords of Ragnarok. I think that's also going to deliver this year. That was on Kickstarter last year. I've already talked about it in this series, Back in the L's. But both of these franchises have taken a shift going from the Greek setting of the first game with gods that people probably know, like Zeus, and changing it into a Norse theme, which is more like Thor. Now, Mythic Battles Pantheon currently has an 8.4 rating on Board Game Geek. It's a skirmish game. It can also be played kind of by scenario as a campaign type adventure. And so I think if you're familiar with that game, you're going to see a lot of similarities in this version, but there will be updates and tweaks. But if you know Mythic Battles Pantheon, you have a general idea of the kind of game that you're going to be getting with this one. And I think for me, I never played Mythic Battles Pantheon. I didn't back that one either. Various reasons, probably having to do with other things that I was more excited in backing at the time. But I feel like that ship has sailed. I've missed that boat. And I didn't pledge this one. So I would like to play it. I would like to jump on to that bandwagon that is both games, both Mythic Battles. So I think my best chance at doing that is probably this year when this one delivers, finding a friend that did pledge it and trying to play it and see what I think about it. So I'm excited for the game. I'm excited to see what I think about it. I would very much like to play it, but it's not a game that I personally backed. And it may present some difficulties for me trying to get it played, since I'm not quite sure at this point in time who I know has backed it or is getting it. But I'm fairly confident that amongst everyone I know, all of my board gaming friends, someone backed it. I'm pretty sure they did. I just need to find out who and set up some game sessions for myself. That brings us to Mythwind, which ran on Kickstarter in October of 2021. This is a game that I personally backed, and it's currently slated to deliver in November of this year. Now, this game was really fascinating to me, and I took a little bit of a chance on backing it because I'm not quite sure how it's going to play. And the reason for that is that there's no end to the game. It's almost like a game system rather than a game. So it's cooperative. It's got asymmetric powers. There are different characters that you can play, and kind of like, let's say, Root or maybe even Merchant's Cove is a better example. Each character is going to use different kinds of mechanics. So you might have a character that uses action selection. You might have a character that uses worker placement. There might be another character that uses some kind of hand management and multi-use cards. But every character is going to play differently. They're all farmers in a town, and it's got this kind of pastoral, idyllic theme to it. But this isn't a game that you're playing to compete with anybody. You're playing it cooperatively, but there aren't even really goals. There's no ending to the game. It's going to feel more like an MMO, where you sit down, you play the game, perhaps with some friends. Maybe you create goals for yourselves. They're part of the town that you want to develop, because you will be kind of developing this town and expanding this world as you play. So you're going to play for a while until you get bored or tired or you have to do something else. And then you're going to pack the game away. There's supposedly a fairly easy system to be able to do that. And then when you want to play it next, you're just going to bring it back out. It's almost like you're playing Minecraft or something, and you're kind of building your own world. So how good this game is going to very much depend, I think, on several different factors working together. Some of it is certainly the design. Some of it is the individual players, and if they like the kind of game that is being presented, this open-ended game. And then part of it is if you're playing with other players, the other players that you're playing with, because if they don't like that, idea, if they don't like the way the game works, it's going to be an unpleasurable experience to play with those people. But if you have a group of people that are really excited for this kind of game, it could just be ongoing, never-ending fun. So for me, it was a little bit of an experiment. I was curious about the game, and I also thought that I could provide a service to people by, getting the game, playing it, and seeing what I think and talking about it. I have a feeling that this game is not going to be out there that much because of the nature of the game. I think that it's not going to have as many backers maybe as other games. So I'm anticipating there's not going to be that much content about there elsewhere. And I thought it would be a good opportunity for me to produce content for it. And I mean, it genuinely feels like something that I will be very interested in. But because it is so different, we'll have to see once it arrives. But it's something that I'm really looking forward to. And I think this is a game that my fiancée Kristen's either going to love or hate. So if she loves it, awesome. I made a good choice, a good risk in backing it, I guess. And if she hates it and I don't like it either, then, we'll just sell it and move on. In fact, I probably will be at some point, as I get my Twitch channel set up and my Patreon and all these things later in this year, I'm considering giving away a bunch of games through Patreon. Kind of like, I think, is it Board Game Ramblings? The Norwegian couple that's doing the Keep or Cull series. I think I may end up doing something like that with games that I'm maybe not having as much luck selling, and just kind of giving away a chunk of games from my collection. So the games that I get that I'm not super in love with, that I feel like I need to move, maybe given away, and this may end up being one of those games, but it'll just depend on, once I play it, what my enjoyment is with it. Next up on the list is Nemesis Lockdown, which ran on Kickstarter in June of 2020, and this is a game that I personally backed. In fact, I didn't pledge the original Nemesis. It was expensive. I think money was tight at the time, and then when this game launched, I had some more money in my savings, and so I was able to go and back all of Nemesis and all of Nemesis Lockdown. So I'm a little worried about when this game shows up. There's going to be so many boxes, and I'm creating, more shelving upstairs. I actually have 2 more shelves coming in from IKEA tomorrow. I'm going to get games even more set up on the shelves upstairs. I am working towards making that my studio space, and so I probably will, in my Kickstarter weekly videos, maybe at the end of those videos, start featuring that space a little bit as I'm kind of building it up. But there's a lot of games up there. There's a lot of shelving up there. I'm getting more shelving soon, and hopefully when Nemesis shows up, all of it, I'll have more room to put it. And that room won't be so much of a congestion area as it has become. So this game was originally intended to deliver in 2021. That didn't happen. It's supposed to be delivering in March, which we're at the end of March. I haven't yet gotten my tracking information, but I think we're just a week or 2 away. I'm pretty sure that I know some people who have already received it. I think the reason that I'm getting it last is because I'm getting all of the old stuff as well. So I'm probably going to be one of the last people to receive it. Now, Nemesis was a huge hit a couple of years back when that game delivered. It's from Awakened Realms, who have been producing a lot of very highly produced, big, expansive games that have been very successful and done very well and delighted many a gamer. The original Nemesis was basically Alien the game, where players were on a ship and they were fighting to escape or save themselves as these aliens created an onslaught on the ship. Now, this game is taking that same idea, that same theme, but it's transplanting it to a secret base on Mars. So this is a cooperative game, although it also has a traitor element in it, and it's got variable player powers. So whenever you play as a certain character, you're going to be able to do special things that no other character can do. It's also a standalone expansion to Nemesis, meaning that it's an expansion, sort of, but you don't need the base game to play it. It is its own thing. So even though it's kind of being billed as a standalone expansion, you really probably can think of it as a sequel game. Although I think there are components that you can kind of trade between the 2 of them. I know they've also produced a lot of cosmetic stuff too, like different versions of the aliens if you want to just play with a different kind of alien and mix it up. It's designed by Adam Kopinski, who's worked on Dark Ages, Lords of Hellas, Frostpunk, the board game, which is another game that I've talked about in this series, and I'm very much looking forward to, and it's delivering this year, as well as Origins First Builders, which is a retail game that I also picked up recently and I'm kind of excited to get to. So he has a bunch of exciting games that are all hitting this year. And it's published by Awakened Realms, who've done Etherfields, The Great Wall, Lords of Hellas, Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon, and This War of Mine. I don't really feel like I need to say too much more about Nemesis because I think it's out there. People know about it. They're already excited about it, as am I. And because I didn't own the original, I did play it a couple times with friends, but it's just going to be a lot of Nemesis goodness coming to me that, apart from being a little bit worried about the box space and the storage space, I'm very excited to own this game and start getting it to the table, both versions of it. New York City was on Kickstarter in October of 2021. This is a game that I personally backed, and it's currently slated to deliver in June, along with the 3 other games in the Stefan Feld City collection. Now, those were part of 2 different campaigns. They ran at different times, and they were supposed to deliver spaced out at different times, but, the global shipping crisis happened. Things got delayed, and it just worked out that at the end of the day, I think it was better, cheaper, more advantageous for Queen Games to kind of ship everything together and to fulfill the 2 campaigns together. Now, originally there were going to be more Kickstarters in the Stefan Feld City collection, at least 2 more, maybe 4 more. For some reason I have it in my head that they were going to do 8 games. And because they were doing 2 games per campaign, per Kickstarter campaign, I was anticipating 2 more campaigns with 2 games each. I'm not sure where they are with that right now because of everything that's been happening in the world with COVID and with global shipping. I have a feeling that this campaign got a lot more expensive than they were expecting it to be. They also offered metal coins through this. Some of those metal coins were generic to be used with any of the games, but they also had options where they were offering specific custom metal coins for each of the 4 games. And that drove up the price a lot. I don't think you had to get those, but for players who wanted to kind of be all in, if you were getting all those sets of metal coins, each one was expensive. The overall price tag for both campaigns, all 4 games, was driven way up. And I wonder also if that, limited the backer numbers and increased the weight of the packages, which makes delivery more expensive. And maybe if fewer backers were involved, again, that makes it more expensive. So these are all things I'm just wondering about, but it's 4 new games. Well, 1 new game, 3 reskins of Stefan Feld games. So I don't have the older games. A lot of them are out of print. And this felt like a great opportunity for me to get some of these games in my collection. Now, New York City is an auction bidding and action drafting game. It is a redesign of Feld's previous game, Rialto. The art on this is by Clemens Franz, who's done a ton of Uwe Rosenberg games. That's probably where people know him from. But he's a very prolific, great artist. I think probably one of the artists that people most identify with board games, whether they realize it or not. He's worked on a ton of games, but his 5 highest rated games at Board Game Geek are Agricola, Caverna, Clans of Caledonia, Le Havre, and Orléans. And some of Feld's games that aren't these older, more out of print games, aren't the games that are part of this collection, include stuff like the Castles of Burgundy, Luna, Merlin, which has had a Merlin big box within the last year or two. And that game, I think, the more the people discover it and play it, the more its reputation is building. And I think Merlin is quickly becoming a game that people are putting in with Feld's best. And also Bonfire. Bonfire has been a big hit for him the last couple of years, and that has a new expansion that's coming out or has already come out. Trees and Creatures. I think it hasn't quite hit retail yet, but it's on its way. So Stefan Feld is one of the, I think, backbones of board games. And I am excited to get more Felds into my collection because I think I've kind of had some holes there in my collection. I haven't had that much Feld. I do own Bonfire, finally. I haven't played it yet. I also own Luna, the deluxeified one. I still haven't played that one. I have played Castles of Burgundy, and I've played some of his others, some of the ones that are getting the redesign. Like I've played Macau, which I enjoyed, and that is one of the games that's getting reprinted through this series. It's now going to be called Amsterdam. So I did also back that one, and I have that one coming as well. I have all the 4 games in the Stefan Feld series coming, and they should all be arriving in June of this year. Now or Never was the latest Ryan Laukat game until the new standalone Sleeping God sequel was announced. This one was on pre-order in June of 2021. It has since delivered, and it is a game that I pre-ordered. I do now have that copy in my possession. I have not yet played it. Ryan Laukat has done a bunch of games in this Arzium series. The 3 that are kind of known to be together are Above and Below, Near and Far, and Now, Now, and Never. But a lot of his other games touch on that world as well. I think Sleeping Gods may be set in it as well. I've played it. I just don't remember if it's in Arzium or not. I believe it is. And I have a smaller game of his called Rome, a very cool little area control game with gems and character cards. And it's almost a filler. It's really fun though. It's a light game that I would recommend to everyone. I think it's a great, one of the best lighter games. So he's kind of been working in this world and developing this world for a while. And usually in his games, he's the designer, he's the artist, and then he also publishes his games through his Red Raven Games label. Now, I'm still working on both my top 30 games of 2020 and my top 30 games of 2021. But at this moment in time, Sleeping Gods is currently my #1 game of 2021. I love that game. I think it's amazing. And Now or Never, I don't believe is quite as kind of expansive or open world as Sleeping Gods was, but I believe that it is a little bit more along those lines than the previous games in the Arzium series, Above and Below and Near and Far. So I think he took some pages from Sleeping Gods and created, a kind of a bigger game with Now or Never, but it's not that same kind of open world campaign game. If you're looking for that, definitely get Sleeping Gods. And if you're having problems finding it at retail, then check it out in the new campaign. I know the new campaign is going to be for a standalone expansion. It's more like a sequel game, really, to Sleeping Gods, and that'll be out this year. But I have a feeling you can probably pick up the original Sleeping Gods through that campaign as well. We'll see. Either way, though, I'm really excited about Now or Never. Interestingly enough, though, Now or Never is already rating out to be his heaviest game. and that includes the 4X game that he did, Empires of the Void 2. So I'm really interested about Now or Never. I'm really curious to get into it. I think maybe I'll play it a little bit and then go back to Sleeping Gods, because I really want to sit down and kind of just finish our campaign of Sleeping Gods and maybe do another campaign. And that game, Sleeping Gods, is something that I definitely want to feature on the Twitch channel once I eventually get that launched later in the year. But Ryan Laucat's awesome. I love his art. I love his design style. And I love it kind of when he kind of leans into more of the storytelling elements. His first game in the Arzium series, Above and Below, I think was a little bit light for my tastes, but as he's, kind of leaned more into ongoing storylines and kind of heavier complexity in some of his mechanics, I love his stuff. So looking forward to getting Now or Never played. Paperback Adventures was on Kickstarter in June of 2021. This is not a game that I personally backed, which I'm having some regrets about that. It's supposed to deliver in May of this year. It's designed by Tim Fowers, who's designed Burgle Bros and then the paperback and hardback series. So I don't love paperback and hardback because essentially those games are deck builders that are more language based. And I've always been more for math and logic puzzles and less for kind of word puzzles. Although I do enjoy a good crossword puzzle and a good Sudoku, but that's besides the point. But word games are not always up my alley. So while I like a good deck builder, and I've played paperback, and I enjoyed it while I played it, it's not really my game. That game has you kind of forming words with letters in your hand, and of course, you're going to score more points for words with, hard to use consonants. And those consonants can be hard to get in your hand, but once you get them there, they're going to score a lot of points. But your hand can also be clogged with those letters, which can then make it, hard to score words. But here's the reason that I'm really excited about Paperback Adventures and why I'm maybe regretting not having backed it and hoping that it'll come back with an expansion campaign and that I can kind of go all in and get the earlier stuff. Which is that this game is designed to be a solo deck builder. I believe you can play it with 2 players, kind of cooperative, working together, but it's essentially designed to be a solo game. And it's not just the kind of wordplay going on, although that's there, it's that deck building. But players are playing different books. So when you back this, you can get different books, and each book is going to immerse you in a story. And I love stories. And I like the gameplay enough. I've played Paperback. I do like the game. I just don't like that word element. But I think putting it into this kind of scenario where you've got different books to play, and there is a kind of narrative and storytelling element to it, as well as that kind of word-based gameplay, this is the version of it that's really going to shine for me. I think the one thing that maybe held me back is because it's designed as a solo game, and I didn't know how easy it would be to get it to the table with Kristen, my fiance, or if it would feel like we're just 2 people playing a solo game together. So I think that's where my hesitancy lay. But I really would like to play this game, and I think if it pops back up on Kickstarter, especially if it's in a month where there's not a ton of other stuff, I probably will go ahead and back it all in. Oh, I should also mention that it has a very cool storage system designed by Game Trays. It's going to work with various characters that you're playing and enemies. So when you go into a book, you're basically going to have a character and you're going to be dealing with an enemy of that book. And so the Game Tray system works with both the character you're playing and the enemy. And it's got cool little kind of sliders that go around to track various things. But I think the whole design of the system, not just the game, but the Game Trays system, is really going to make this game easy to play, easy to kind of pull out and then put back away. And it seems to me that the whole experience with this is just going to be a very pleasurable and fun tactile one. So hopefully I get another chance to back this if it comes back to Kickstarter. Now, the Paradox Initiative is a game that I'm really excited about, partly because it has that same team from Merchants of the Dark Road, Brian Sewer and Andrew Bosley, working together again. So I'm talking to you about it, but when I put together this list, it was going to come to Kickstarter in January of 2022, this year. It's been pushed back to April. So I think that means that it's unlikely that it actually will deliver this year. I mean, that would be a pretty quick turnaround. So I originally was thinking this one would deliver this year, especially if it had a January Kickstarter. I thought it might come out, in like December. But I think with the pushback to April, it probably won't be delivering until 2023. So it's a little bit of a oops and a blip on this list, but I'm still going to talk to you about it because I don't really have a game to replace it with. And I'm also really excited about it. And I think people should know about it before it launches in April of this year, the Kickstarter campaign, because it will give you the opportunity to be aware of it and hopefully jump onto it if it's a game for you when it launches. So this game is a redesign of an earlier Brian Seward game, one of his first, I think, from 2016 called Paradox. Now that game's got like a 7.1 on Board Game Geek, which is a decent score, but not great. But I am assuming that some of that comes from the fact that it was one of Brian's first designs. He's probably learning as he went, and I don't know the production level of that game. However, it's coming to Kickstarter. I'm sure he's been tweaking it and redesigning it. It's going to have awesome art from Andrew Bosley, Everdell, Tapestry, and the theme's pretty cool. And so I think production-wise and design-wise, it's going to be upgraded. And if we're starting from a 7.1, where are we going to land? In the 8s and the 9s? Those are pretty good places to be. Hopefully, it'll be that good. But the theme is super intriguing, and the creators are intriguing. I've told you about the creators, so let me tell you about the theme. So in a little bit of a callback to my father's work, players in this game are mad scientists as well. However, they're not doing these, crazy experiments that are going to get them killed. Well, maybe they are. But in this game, the scientists are competing to claim strands of space-time from worlds across the multiverse. I don't know, that hits all my sci-fi genre buttons right there. And it's using mechanics like card drafting, resource management, and set collection. So nothing earth-shattering, but a good set of quality mechanics around a theme that I'm finding very compelling, with a couple of creators whose work I really, really like and really, really trust. And it's based on a game that's previously existed that is solid, and it should be, and I'm hoping it will be, a significant upgrade from there. So I'm really excited about the Paradox Initiative. So unless when the campaign, launches, it looks awful, which I don't see how that's possible, this is definitely going to be something I'll be backing, hopefully in another month, in April. That brings me to Perseverance Castaway Chronicles, episodes 1 and 2, which ran on Kickstarter in July of 2020. This is a game that I personally backed. It's set to be delivering, like right now, March of this year. I haven't gotten any notifications yet, so it may end up delivering in April. But this is one of the games I am most excited about out of everything coming out this year. And the reason for that is that it's published by Mindclash, who have made some of my favorite games, Anachrony, Cerebria, and Tricarion. And their games are so well designed. They are heavy games, heavy Euros. So if that's not for you, then that's not for you, but that's definitely for me. So heavy Euros with so much production value behind them. I think they're right up there at the top of the industry, along with people like Chip Theory Games, maybe Eagle Griffin Games when they do some of their, deluxe Lacerda games. And I think Orange Nebula is kind of catching up to them. They do Vindication and Unsettled. But Mindclash, for my money, I think, makes the best designed, best produced heavy games. They're amazing. They're amazingly designed, amazing components, amazing table presence. And this game is going to be a heavy Euro, no less. But it's also going to be a series of linked games. So this is 2 different games that are basically united in their theme, which has players on a modern day ocean liner on a luxury cruise, cruising around the oceans. The boat crashes, and they find themselves on this island, kind of like Land of the Lost Island. There's mysteries, and there's dinosaurs. So they intended to do multiple campaigns in this, kind of like with the Stefan Feld City Collection. I believe, though, they only intended to do 2 campaigns, so it's 4 games over 2 campaigns. This first campaign that is delivering very soon has 2 standalone games. They are Euro-style games, they've got dice drafting and dice placement, and they've got lots of miniatures and lots of dinosaur miniatures. Episode 1 is kind of like a tower defense game. Players are going to be building up, developing, and protecting this foothold town of Perseverance. So this is going to be the town that, players have built coming onto this island. And they're going to be also fighting off waves of attacking dinosaurs. So it's kind of like a tower defense game, but at the same time, you're building up the town and you're starting to kind of like build up this story, this world. Then in episode 2, it's going to be more of an exploration game. So players are going to be expanding the settlement, exploring the wilderness, and there's going to be this mystery on the horizon, this mysterious structure. It makes me think of the TV show Lost a little bit, and players are going to be charting a path to that. So I think it's really interesting. First of all, as I've said, Mind Clash, amazing production standard. Their games are possibly the best made games with the most table presence and the best to look at. And I like the fact that they're keeping, this kind of Euro game style that they have, while also expanding into, kind of a narrative campaign game over the course of multiple games. And having games that are going to work different mechanically while they kind of build their story and build their lore. By the time this is done, all 4 games, this is going to be an amazing experience. I suppose in a very long game day, you'll even be able to sit down and play all 4 games in succession and have this incredible experience as players, crash on this island, build this colony, explore the wilderness, and then whatever is happening, wherever that's going in episodes 3 and 4. So this is one of the games that I'm most excited about this year. Mind Clash, they're always at the top of my list. Primal The Awakening was on Kickstarter in February of 2021. This is a game that I personally backed, and it's currently slated to deliver in October of this year. Now, this is a monster boss battler. It reminds me a little bit of Kingdom Death Monster, but that's a game that I've just never gotten into. There's already so much content for it. I know you can spend thousands of dollars on it. You also have to assemble the miniatures. They don't come pre-assembled. You actually have to put them together. So there's just extra steps to Kingdom Monster Death. It's also kind of a lifestyle game, I think, where if you're playing that, it may become hard to play much else. I played World of Warcraft back in the mid-aughts, and that video game so kind of took over my video game life that at the time I was continuing to buy some other games, but I didn't have any time to play any other video games. So I had this huge backlog at the time of PS2 games that I never actually caught up with. I still own them. Some of them I'm still wanting to play. Some of them I'm trying to buy the later versions, but that kind of affected my ability to play other video games. And Kingdom Death Monster, I feel the same way about it. I've been a little wary of it. So it felt like for me, this was a chance to maybe jump in and have that kind of experience in a somewhat smaller game. Now, the team that's behind this game worked on a game called ELO Darkness. Came out in 2018. It has a 7.5 rating on Board Game Geek. It's not a game that I know very well, but if any of you do, it's the same team. And that's what they've done. They don't have a lot of credits, so all we can really kind of refer to as reference is that ELO Darkness game. So this is a monster hunting co-op campaign game. It is designed for campaign play, kind of ideally, but it also has standalone games that you can play, which I think is really good for a game like this, so that you can, have a good group of your friends, you can play in a campaign, but if you want to introduce it to a friend who doesn't have time for a campaign, or maybe even non-gamers, you can do that with the hunt mode. Now, as far as the campaign goes, I think that's where the game's really going to shine, because there's character customization, there's going to be crafting and kind of upgrading. So as you get into this game and you play it more and more, you're going to be evolving your character. And I always like to see that kind of progression in games. I like to start small, fight what I can. And oftentimes those early battles are tough because you don't have much. And then you get more powerful and you kind of acquire more stuff. But as you do, the monsters that you're fighting get more powerful as well. It does really feel to me like this is kind of like Monster Hunter, the board game. Although I know there is another Monster Hunter, the board game, that's actually being published. But I've played some of those video games. So it feels to me like it's those video games combined with Kingdom Death Monster in a different version. I also know that there isn't a lot of exploration or kind of story in this game. This is very focused on the boss fights. And so you're not kind of doing a lot of exploring or kind of walking through different areas and building up your character that way. No, it is purely kind of through the creatures that you are fighting and killing, and then using, like in Monster Hunter, using those materials to craft new stuff for yourself. So most of the game just takes place on a single board, and a lot of it has to do with position of the monsters. So you're going to have these big miniatures for the monsters that you really just kind of set down in the middle of the board, and then you kind of turn them as you need to. And there are different areas around the monsters, and so players are going to be moving around these areas trying to get themselves set up in different positions. Now, if I can reference World of Warcraft again, the rogue character in that had a backstab ability, so he would always want to be behind a character, and he would get bonus points, when he was attacking them from behind. So when you were playing that game with a group of characters, you'd have the tank type character grab the boss and then turn them, and a lot of these damage dealer characters go up behind them and do extra damage. I imagine a lot of that kind of stuff is going to be in this game, where it's all about positioning and strategically how you can do damage to the monster at its weak points and places like that. So it's a game that's going to have a lot of tactics to it, and the progression that happens is going to happen through those boss battles and not so much through storytelling. And I love storytelling. Not everything has to be that. So I'm very curious to play this game and have fun with it in the kind of gameplay that it presents. Rat Queens to the Slaughter was on Kickstarter in August of 2021. Unfortunately, this isn't one that I personally backed. It is a game that I was very curious about. Now, this is a cooperative game. It's a deck builder, and it's got dice checks for like attacks and skill checks and things like that. So, kind of mechanics that people are familiar with, that you'll find in cooperative games and dungeon crawlers and things like that. And I think for me, there were just a lot of games at the time, and I had to cut something. So I cut this, but I'm really interested in it. I'd really like to play it. I hope somebody that I know is getting this one so that I can check it out. It's designed by Erica Bouyaris and Senfung Lim. Erica has worked on games like Bosk, Kodama 3D, and Roar, King of the Pride. And Senfung Lim has worked on games like Akratiri, Belfort, Junkart, Kingdom Rush, Rift in Time, and most recently Mind Management, which was a big hit in the past year. And it's published by Deepwater Games, who have put out things like Fantastic Factories, Hanamakoji, and Welcome To, which is one of my favorite roll and write games alongside Cartographers. Now, there's miniatures in this game, which is pretty cool. It brings the table presence up a little bit, and it just feels like this game is going to be so much fun to play. Now, it's based on Curtis Weeby's comic book series, which is billed as a darkly comedic sass and sorcery comic series. And the art definitely captures that feeling. A lot of that art is in this game, and Curtis Weeby has kind of gone on record as saying that he's very excited about this game. So I don't think this is a game that, occasionally you see IP purchased. The creators have very little to do with it. There's been a couple of Umbrella Academy board games, I think, that are maybe not really capturing the brilliance of that IP as much as it could. So, you don't always know if you're getting like a faithful, representative, good game when it's based on the IP that you like. I think in this case, though, that is the case. The creator is on board. I think he's kind of been hands-on with the development of this game, but he is on board as definitely being behind this one. And I think both of the designers, Eric Bouyaris and Senfung Lim, I think have a lot of awareness in terms of respecting the source material and getting it right, and kind of appealing to the fans of this game. So I do believe, while I am not a fan of the comic series, I kind of stopped reading comics in the mid-aughts when I was playing World of Warcraft. I just didn't have time for everything. So at that time, I was a regular comic book reader. I mean, I collected a lot of comics. But this series came out after I stopped reading comics. So I'm not so much the target audience for this one. I don't have experience with the source material. But I can tell it's great, and I'm really interested in the game. And I think if this one were to come back to Kickstarter at some point, I might back it, depending on what else was up at the time. I definitely want to find a copy of this and give it a play, though, to see if it's as good as I think it may be. But it's one to look out for, and if you're a fan of the comic, definitely keep your eyes peeled for this one. Reload was on Kickstarter in February of 2021. This is not one that I personally backed, and it's currently slated to deliver in April of this year. Now, I didn't back this one because it reminded me of several other games that were kind of up at the time. There was In Too Deep from Burnt Island Games, which I did back and I do enjoy. And there were a couple other games kind of a similar theme that had to do with kind of hard to pinpoint mechanics, things that aren't necessarily used in other games. And then this kind of free-for-all arena fighting, but with more Euro mechanics. So not really just a skirmish game, it's kind of a meld between skirmish games and Euro games. And there's a very interesting track in this game where as you do different abilities and use different things, you're going to be placing these tokens alongside a track, and then how long you can make that track, that'll score you more points at the end of the game in various ways. Now, it's designed by Chris Beyer, who I don't really think has designed too many things before, but it's got art from Jackie Davis, which is another big appealing point to me. She's worked on games like Colosseum, I think there was the second version of that one, Cubitos, Euphoria, Build a Better Dystopia, Stockpile, and Viticulture. So a lot of her work has been done on Stonemaier Games stuff. But I really like her art, and she's someone who, when I know she's the artist on the game, it immediately perks me up and makes me more prone to buying it or pledging it. Now, it's put out by Colossal Games, who I have mixed feelings about as a publisher. One of the games they did was called Papillon, which had butterflies and these little kind of like clothespins, and you would attach these butterflies to flowers. And that was a set collection game. It was very pretty. It didn't really have that much going on mechanically to set it apart, but the prettiness and the putting the butterflies on the flowers made for what should have been a very kind of delightful set collection game. However, that game had component issues where these little kind of clothespins just kind of kept falling off everything and all of the components would fall apart. So I have mixed feelings about Colossal Games. I think that might have been one of the reasons that I didn't pledge this one. But I like the look of it. I like the art. I'm really, really intrigued by it. And it's something that I'd like to get to play this year if at all possible. It's also got really cool custom dice. It's got minis in the game. And it's got this fame tracker thing that I was telling you about that really intrigues me. Also, thematically, I find the game pretty compelling. It looks to me a bit like Smash TV, if you ever played that video game back in the 80s, I guess. Now, this game features mega corporations of the military-industrial complex who are essentially creating and testing out cybernetically enhanced super soldiers. And, it takes place in this future world. Reminds me a little bit, not just of Smash TV, but of The Running Man, at least the Arnold Schwarzenegger version. I think that version was a little more kind of blown up and crazy and bombastic than the original Stephen King story it came from. But I feel that kind of bright colors and feeling in this game. So players are going to be fighting this battle royale. So it's got that skirmish element to it. It's also got Euro mechanics. And there's going to be contamination that's coming out in the different hexes of this modular board. And as that contamination comes out, it's going to create a hard timer on the end game because players won't be able to stay in contaminated areas. So they'll kind of slowly get pushed out into other areas of the board until the whole thing is contaminated, and then the game will end and the strong will survive and become stars of the show and probably go on to do the bidding of these mega corporations and do awful things in the world. But we're just going to focus on the game itself and the fun of this battle royale. So it's a very colorful game. I like a lot of the theme behind it. It feels very fun to me. I'm a little bit worried about Colossal as a publisher, but it doesn't look to me like the components can have problems the way that they did in Papillon. So I did not back Reload. I really would like to play it. It looks like a really fun game, and I think it's going to sit in that kind of medium light level where it's just going to appeal to a broad swath of gamers. That brings me to Resurgence, which was on Kickstarter in December of 2021. So it almost feels like it wouldn't make it out in 2022, but it is slated to deliver in August of this year. And this is a game that I personally backed. And the reason for that is very simple. It's designed by Stan Kordonsky, who has kind of been growing as a designer recently. He has Endless Winter Paleo-Americans about to deliver. He's also worked on Dice Hospital, Lockup, a role-player tale, which has the Breakout expansion coming out this year. And he's also worked on Rurik Dawn of Kiev, Rurik Stone and Blade, and Shadow Kingdoms of Valeria. I think he's rising up to become one of my favorite designers these days. At least he's probably in the top 10 at this point. And he did this campaign for his newest game, through his new company, Half a Kingdom Games. And so this definitely was something that I wanted to support Stan in doing and support his new company with. Now, the Kickstarter maybe didn't do as well as it could have because it was being run through this new label, and they have not run Kickstarters before. Sometimes, for me as well, that can be a reason not to back. However, in this case, because it was Stan Kordonski, I didn't really have any hesitation about it. Now, this game is set in the ruins of a post-apocalyptic Moscow, and players are going to be leaders or aspiring to be leaders, and they're taking on missions trying to unite the survivors under their leadership. Often that's going to put them into conflict with the mutant tribes in the surrounding wastelands. And it's got mechanics like bag building, resource management, and hidden worker placement. Hidden worker placement seems to be a mechanic that's taking off more and more, where players will, assign their workers to something behind a player screen, and so they don't know if they're going to be in conflict when all the players reveal, and then they go to put those workers in those spaces. Some other games have hidden worker placement where you're just doing worker placement on your player screens, and so other players aren't necessarily seeing what you're doing. But I like that mechanic. I like that addition of unawareness between players, and I think it makes for some pretty interesting decisions in gameplay. And also the theme of this is kind of fascinating to me. And certainly the fact that it's a Stan Kordonski design, that makes me very, very excited for it. So I'm really looking forward to Resurgence. I think I might be looking forward to Endless Winter Paleo-Americans a little bit more. But I think this year we're going to have two amazing new games from Stan Kordonski, and he's just going to cement himself in there with the top designers. So whatever he does after this is going to be even more fascinating. I'm really curious to see what he launches or what he makes after these two games, because I think his star is going to rise. People are going to pay a lot of attention, and his games are going to be played by a lot more people soon, I think. Return to the Dark Tower was on Kickstarter in February of 2020. I did not personally back this one, and I'll get into that in a moment. It was originally scheduled to deliver in 2021. It was pushed back. It's now slated to deliver in March, and I think I've seen people already receiving the game. So here's the thing. This has a slate of designers on it. It was put out by Restoration Games, which seem to be doing two things, really. They're doing the Unmatched series, and then they've made a lot of new versions of games that people liked from the 80s. And when they work on one of those games, they seem to pull in a handful of smart, well-regarded, talented designers. And I know on this one, Isaac Childress, who does Gloomhaven and Frosthaven, and Rob Davio, who does like the Pandemic Legacy series. He did Seafall. In fact, he was the designer that really kind of kicked off the Legacy game. I think he worked on like Risk, some of the earlier ones, and then Pandemic just made the Legacy game really, really popular, and now there are a ton of them. But Rob Davio really, really started that Legacy game as a genre. Now, this one's got engine building, it's got resource management, and it's got a couple designers on it that I really, really like. So why didn't I back this one? And there's a bunch of reasons. And I'm excited about the game existing, and I'm becoming more and more excited as time goes on to play it. I'm thinking I probably should have backed it, but here's why I didn't. So first of all, I had the original Dark Tower back in the 80s. A friend of mine who is from Ukraine, I talked about Resurgence, which takes place in Moscow. So there's Russia and Ukraine are in the news right now, obviously. But I had a good friend growing up who was from Ukraine, and he had Dark Tower first. I played it at his house. I loved it so much. I got my own copy of it, and it was a game that I played quite a bunch as a kid. So when I saw this new version of it, unlike probably a lot of people, I actually have experience with the old game. So I saw the changes that they were making to the game, and I didn't really love them. So that was kind of problem number one. Problem number two is that the tower that they constructed is very complex. And at the end of every turn, to kind of signify that it's the end of a turn, players will take a skull and put it in the top of the tower, so it kind of runs through the tower. And I remember playing the original game. You were kind of at the mercy of the tower, meaning that if for some reason your tower broke, you can't play the game. And so, you in the 80s, whatever, you put your double Ds in there, you played the game, and you just let it ride out as long as you can until the tower kind of broke. And I can't remember for me if it broke or if I just ended up kind of growing out of the game. But it's always a worry in games like this. And I had hoped that when they did this version of the game, they would do something to tech-proof it a little bit. But instead, they ran in the other direction. So they made this game completely app-dependent. So it uses an app, and it uses a mechanical tower. And it just felt like between both of those things, those are both kind of worries for me, because I don't want the mechanical stuff, the technology to break down. But if they decide to not support the app, then you can't play the game either. So there were two reasons why this game could become unplayable in your collection, depending on how things go, fairly quickly, within a few years. And so I was a little bit worried to take the risk on that. I think with shipping, it was over $250. And I have had in my lifetime my own experiences with Dark Tower. So I didn't necessarily have the same kind of FOMO maybe other people had. I didn't feel the need to rush out and back it. I wanted the game to be good, and there were designers working on it that had me excited for it. It just seemed like a bigger risk than most games. And so I didn't back it. Now I see it delivering, I see pictures of it, I really would like to play it, and I don't know, I guess time will tell whether my worries and fears about the app and the technology are well-founded or not. If they do come back to Kickstarter with it again, I don't know if it'll make it into retail. I think it's an expensive game to produce. But if it does come back to crowdfunding, it's something maybe I will. I think what I'll also need to do is watch some more gameplay videos and see how the gameplay has changed from the game that I know, because I know gameplay has changed. And that was another one of my worries, was just kind of seeing how that gameplay, like in the original game, you basically had to travel around the circular board, which went around the tower. And things would happen when you went on certain buildings. There was one building that kind of looked like a toilet that we always laughed about. You would go through the frontier that kind of separated certain things, and you would fight a lot of random encounters. The randomness was a little bit annoying, which I also didn't want to see in this version of the game. You could go into a fighting kind of these brigands and be in a good position with the number of soldiers that you had, and you would watch the kind of rounds of the battle tick down as the tower kind of made noises and did its things. And sometimes, even when you thought you were well prepared, you would take some heavy losses early in the fight, and you'd be watching, these losses kind of pile on top of themselves, and your forces get obliterated down to nothing. And so you'd have this decision. I think you could cancel out in the middle of a fight, but you'd lose, the fighters that had already died. And you'd also lose the ability to get anything from the fight if you did somehow turn out a victory, if those numbers kind of turned around. But sometimes it would be running against you to such a degree that you just didn't want to cancel and stop the fight. So there was kind of randomness in the game. That was another thing that prevented me from it. But I knew that the original game was just this kind of race around the board with these random fights, largely controlled by tech, and there weren't that many choices in the game. So it had me worried about them either creating a very different game, which might not have that much in common with Dark Tower, or them being very respectful of the game and creating a new version that might have a lot of problems, might have a lot of barriers to entry, barriers to the game having a long life in your collection. And I just didn't know how I felt about a game if they were going to preserve that high level of randomness in it. It felt like a game that I would want to maybe play once or twice out of nostalgia, and then it might be a game that I don't really want to play again. So I would like to get out there in the world, play it, see how it landed, see how it ended up being, and what I feel about it. And then if I really do like it, if it kind of doesn't have the problems that I feared the most, then I'm going to be sitting and waiting for it to come back to crowdfunding. But we'll see. Either way, though, it remains a game that I am very curious about and anticipating and would like to play and see where it ended up. Rolling Heights was a game that was on Kickstarter in February of 2022. Now, this is a smaller game, and when I created this list, I actually thought it would be delivering this year. That's not going to be the case. It's being published by AEG, who sometimes does take a longer time to deliver, and it is currently slated to deliver in February of 2023. So it's still on my list. I'm still talking about it just because it was relevant when I created the list. This is not a game that I ended up personally backing, though, despite being originally excited about it. The reason I was excited about it is that it's designed by John D. Clare, who's worked on games like Mystic Vale, everyone probably knows, also Edge of Darkness and Dead Reckoning. Dead Reckoning is a pirate-themed game that is about to deliver from crowdfunding, and it uses the same kind of card crafting system and sleeves that Mystic Vale did and that Edge of Darkness did. So those games are very well regarded. John's also worked on Cubidos, Eco's First Continent, and Space Base. So I know of him as a designer, and I've liked some of his other games. So I was very excited for this one. Once I saw the Kickstarter campaign, I was less excited because it has to do with rolling meeples. And the actions that you take depend how the meeples land. You know, whether they're standing up, whether they're kind of leaning over, or whether they're flat on their side. And the more I looked at it, the more I found that I just didn't really like that mechanic. I didn't find it that compelling. And it was kind of a smaller type of game, which remains a little odd than why they're taking so long to deliver it. But I think with everything that's been happening in global shipping, I think they're just trying to give themselves enough lead time that they don't have to then delay later. So I understand and respect the choice, but that's the reason that I thought it was a game that would be delivering this year, and now it no longer is. Now, it's got art by Kwanchai Maria, which almost got me back to backing it because he's one of my favorite artists in the business. He's worked on games like Cryptid, Dinosaur Island, In the Hall of the Mountain King, the most recent version of Sidereal Confluence, and Under Falling Skies. And I will say that whatever I think about any game that has Kwanchai Maria art, it is always a much better game for having Kwanchai Maria art. He does a lot of kind of thick line work, and his art can look a little abstracted, but it's also really just bold and vibrant, and it's great for board games. There's a lot of theme that comes through his art. His art makes every game better. So he almost got me to back Rolling Heights. And I do like city building games, and some of the art from Rolling Heights kind of shows the city horizon and things folding up, just like that Kristen Nolan movie, the one with Leonardo DiCaprio that's escaping my brain right now, Inception. There's kind of some Inception things, I think, going on with the cities and the way that you can kind of build up your city. So I have several friends that I know that are backing it. Some of them actually know John Clare personally. So I think they're just going to back everything that he makes out of their friendship for him. So I know there will be opportunities for me to play this game and report back to you all what I think of it. And it felt like a game that I wanted to play, but maybe a game that I didn't need to back and have in my collection. So I'm excited to play it. I'm anticipating it for 2022, but it is not a game that I personally backed. Oh, and I probably also should mention this. It's published by AEG. I've mentioned them earlier in this video because they are publishing other stuff on this list. But if you're looking just for who they are in relationship to this game, they've also published Calco, Cascadia, Istanbul, Space Base, and War Chest. So those are some of their games, and hopefully if you like those games, that may give you an indication of if you will like Rolling Heights. But it will be delivering in February of 2023. If you didn't back it and you think it's a game that you'll like, I have a feeling it's going to make it to retail and in a package that's not too much different from the Kickstarter version. So I think this is something that you'll be able to pick up at retail and feel like you're still getting almost, or yes, the best version of the game. The last game on my list, the last game of this video, is Shadow Network, and this is a game that was on Kickstarter in November of 2020. Now, this is not a game that I personally backed. I feel like this video actually probably has the most games that were on crowdfunding that I did not back. And I can't really remember why, other than in November of 2020, I think money was pretty tight for me. So this may have been a game that I was interested in, and I kind of had to just pare things back and back kind of more specific things. But it is a game that I'm super curious about and wanting to play. Now, it was originally supposed to deliver in November of 2021. That's been pushed back to Q1 of 2022, which we're in like the last week of March. So we're almost out of Q1. I don't think that Shadow Network has delivered yet. I'm not 100% on that just because I didn't back it. It's not really on my radar. But I think if it hasn't delivered yet, they said Q1, so maybe a month or two later, maybe it'll deliver in April or May. I think what intrigues me the most about Shadow Network, though, is that it is set in the Cold War and it's themed around spies. And it's sort of a set collection game. It's got resource management, but it has a mechanic in it that's pretty interesting, which is if you send your spies into certain areas to get certain kinds of intel, there's this mechanic called leaking, where I guess the idea is that you can't perfectly obtain all of this covert information. Some of it will find its way out there into the world, maybe through some of the people that are helping you. I'm just thinking in a general thematic kind of way. But how that is portrayed in the game is that when you take certain kinds of intel, there will be leaking of certain resources into surrounding areas. So that's how they're kind of representing that. But I like that kind of take on the mechanic, and I like how that works within this Cold War spy theme. And it also has art by James Churchill, who's worked on Legacies and Public Market, and Jason Washburn, who's worked on Public Market and Winterborn. And it's being published by Talon Strike Studios, who's put out such games as Camp Pinetop, House of Borgia, Public Market, Vinyl, and Winterborn. But it's being done as this kind of, medium light to medium midweight game. Art that I like, mechanics that are doing something new that I find intriguing. So I need to find a copy of this and play this one, because I have a feeling it's just going to be a game that I play where I'm like, wow, that was an interesting idea. It didn't really work out that well, and it's kind of a dud, and I don't need to play it again. Or I'm going to be like, this is amazing, this is really cool, and this is a game that I need to let people know about because more people should be playing this. So hopefully I'll get the chance to play this game this year and find out if it's as good as it could be, and then let you guys know if I think that that's true. So we've made it through another 20 games. Thank you very much for coming back and watching this and exploring some of these new games that we're going to be seeing all around us in 2022. I have one video left with the final 20 games. The final video will not be a long wait like it has been for this one. That final video should be coming out early next week. I'll also have a Kickstarter weekly getting published in between these two videos, and that video, the Kickstarter weekly, is going to cover at least 9 different campaigns that will be funding next week. So if you're curious about what's going to complete funding next week and you may be looking to make some decisions there, stay tuned for that video. That hopefully will help you through that decision-making process. Thank you very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and keep your eyes peeled for the final video in this series, which will be out within the week. Take care, play lots of great games, and I'll see you again very soon.